Hi, Diefesters. My name is Rudolf Vincent, and I am the founder of Diefest Global. A warm welcome to you all on the third edition. This year, Diefest will focus on the future of work by addressing authenticity, belongingness, and social impact as some of the most important practices for building a more inclusive and purpose driven workforce for everyone to thrive. Before we begin, I would like to humbly thank our belonging partner, Newsella, for supporting our initiative in democratizing world class content and promoting equity in education. On this note, I would like to welcome you to our session on building a culture where employees receive support due to personal challenges. Our moderator for today is an experienced lawyer and HR professional with a lifelong passion for career long focus on equal employment opportunities, diversity, and inclusion. She is currently ANZ's Diversity and Inclusion Lead, responsible for setting and executing the bank's diversity and inclusion strategy across 34 markets, ensuring alignment with the broader talent and culture and organizational purpose, vision, and strategy. She is known for her curiosity and empathy and for taking a pragmatic, collaborative, and relationship based approach. Please welcome Fiona Macdonald.
Hello, thanks so much, Rudolph, for the lovely introduction. Before I start, I would really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining you today here in Australia, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to traditional custodians of the various lands from which different people are joining us today. Well, I'm very excited about today's topic on some of the things I'm most passionate about, particularly belonging. And we've got a couple of wonderful speakers joining us. First of all, we have Dr. Sujatha Sudheendra, who's Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Aditya Birla Capital. And we also have Marienela Vazquez, Chief Customer Officer for Numerated. Thank you both so much for joining us today. And I'll get you both to just do a little bit of an introduction before we start, starting with you, Sujatha.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I am Sujatha and I belong to India. I manage HR for a non-banking organization. We are called Aditya Birla. And I also manage diversity and inclusion for the Aditya Birla Capital.
Wonderful to have you with us. Marienela.
Yes, Marienela Vazquez. I'm the Chief Customer Officer for Numerated Growth Technologies. We're a fintech out here in Boston, Massachusetts. I lead up all of our customer services organizations and come to the business with 15 plus years prior to being here of standing up and managing service orgs and implementation organizations. So really excited for today's conversation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And it is really fascinating that we've got, three very different countries represented and a global audience. But at the same time, these are such universal human topics that we're talking about. So I guess to get us started, Sujatha, why is it important to be your authentic self at work? Are there any benefits to the organisation as well as to the individual in creating a space where someone can be their true self?
So authenticity means you are bringing your complete self. You're neither putting on layers nor you're leaving any layers at the entrance of the organization. It means you're true to your personality, you're true to your values. And authentic people or authentic leaders, they are aware of their strengths, they are aware of their limitation. In fact, the motivation is intrinsically drawn for them because they are very clear about themselves. They're very comfortable about themselves. They don't have to be somebody else. They respect themselves, and because they respect themselves, they always draw, people do respect them. Today, if you look at the leaders, the expectations from the people, the leaders have to be behaving at a very different level. For example, today employees want to be very open. They respect open culture. They want to be connected in the team. And let me tell you, Fiona, how it helps the organization. I think The productivity of the organization always is at a high when you have authentic leaders, because authentic leaders are comfortable with themselves. They're also comfortable with the others because they offer a very psychologically free place for people to be themselves. There's so much of belongingness in the team, and let me just give you an example. I think COVID is the best example. When COVID happened, the first thing that all our leaders did was to address people. They said, don't worry about your jobs. You all are very important. And don't once you don't worry about your job, you are able to give, a lot. The business model suddenly changed overnight. All we said, let's talk to our customers. Can you imagine the chairman of the organization taking the first call saying, don't worry, your jobs are safe. Let us connect with our customers. You'll connect with your families. We will figure out a different model. In fact, the productivity increased. I'm in a banking business. So banking is where I've given money and I have to get my money back safe, as much as safe as my employees are. We went and spoke to our customers. We figured out, because none of us knew when COVID struck, none of us knew how long it is going to impact. And then we figured out ways. So what happens is, authentic leaders will never claim, I know everything. We are in control of everything. I don't think so. Where we say, we don't know, let us figure a way out. Let us, evolve together. So there's belongingness, there's productivity. And when you offer, this psychologically free space that is offered, people are much, much more productive. In fact, there's a lot of creativity, Fiona. Because how did these suddenly MS Teams and Zooms, how did it come to life? It was existing before too.
Yeah.
It was there. It was there on all our laptops, but we always, preferred this mode. Then you understood that you can do business fairly well using MS Teams. That became the hero and heroines of our lives. So the belongingness, your productivity, your creativity, and high engagement levels was, I think, the result of being authentic, where you are aware of your strength, you're aware of your limitations. When you're aware of your limitations, you can understand the vulnerability of the other person that you're interacting, because you always want somebody to hold you when you're vulnerable, right? So you also respect the other individual when the individual is vulnerable. I think that's how being authentic always helps.
Yeah, I think that's so important, and it's a way of connecting as a human, isn't it? Of kind of recognizing that in each other. How about you, Marienela? In terms of, before we sort of really dive deeper into being your authentic self, what do you see as the benefits to the organization as well as the individual?
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff. As I was looking back and sort of thinking about this earlier, really it's about being able to have that connection within your team, right, at all levels across the organization. When you show up authentic, you show up a little bit vulnerable, right, and so that makes teams open, and starts to make other people on the team aware of their vulnerabilities and their strengths, and what they bring to the table. And it creates, a sense of, team collaboration. Very, very clear. COVID's probably the greatest example ever. You're right, where we all got personal and got to know each other. There's both in our personal lives and in our professional lives, and learned so much about each other. But productivity went through the roof, right? It was, almost an immediate sense of, all right, well, we're on a team and here are my strengths and here's where I'm really good at strategy. And so we had folks, in our world who were 100% focused on strategy and what are we doing and how are we aiming this and how are we going to get to our customers? And then a bunch of other folks who were like, we're really good at coding, or I'm great at just hands-on, configuration or whatever it was. I'm really good at talking to customers. And like, we sort of just figured out where everyone's limits were really quickly, and people were able to plug and play, right? I've seen that just continue throughout, not just my business, but even a lot of our customers, where a lot of folks are still remote, but they're able to function via Zoom, Teams, what be it, because again, they've got that connection now that may have been missing before, when a lot of I think the pre-COVID world, while everyone was starting to really work on authenticity and really pushing on having a sense of belonging, there was a little less of that, right? Because you were still sort of there were still walls up and some things. So like I said, the benefits really are around, having an organization that's fully collaborative, increasing productivity and effectiveness through that sort of authentic, everyone sort of being able to be at their authentic selves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, you sort of look back, I think, and can think of examples where maybe you weren't kind of bringing your whole self to work and realize it's quite exhausting. If you've got something major going on at home, but you don't, I love what you're saying, Sujatha, earlier about the layers, about you don't have to leave them, take them off or put them on, because then that can get really, really confusing. So how can leaders promote authenticity at work? It doesn't come naturally to everybody. Some people definitely do it more than others. So how can leaders promote authenticity at work? What are some tips for some people, leaders that we might have on the call today? Maybe Sujatha, did you want to start?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Walk the talk. Let me just share an example. So, Dr. Santrup Mishra, who heads HR at Aditya Birla Group level, he role models. When he does our reviews, he talks about his failures that in the last 1 year. He'll say these were the areas probably I did not give my level best. And when he has his appraisal with the chairman of the group, can you imagine he's talking about his failures? And it is okay to talk about failures, because we are now saying that we are just human beings. We have our own strength, we have our own limitations. When the chief human resources officer of this conglomerate is talking about his failures, it gives me a lot of strength to speak the truth. Many of us in organization, we hide facts because we are scared. So he'll say, forget, yes, let's accept this a failure. Don't think about the money part right now. But how do we ensure this mistake is not repeated? Which means, do we have to strengthen our policy? This failure has happened because a failure in the policy, failure in the system, failure in our communication. That gives you strength to say it is okay to fail, but don't fear of talking failures. I think that was the best example, and that in fact leads to a lot of creativity, because you're figuring out why it should not happen. Nobody is asking, it's okay, it's happened is fine, but how we will look at how it should not occur. The second thing is, I think we display our vulnerability. It's so important today. Vulnerability is considered, it's another dimension of courage, because where I say I don't know, which means I'm seeking support from others. It could be your frontline customer, it could be your peer, it could be a colleague, it could be from industry. Let me give you an example, Fiona. When this COVID struck, in from our organization, the chairman was very clear. He said, we have allocated hospitals, we will ensure you all will get your oxygen cylinders. And he just gave us 3 mobile numbers, and he said 24/7, just be connected at these 3 numbers. We went out of way to help our industry friends. It was just not limited to employees. We started connecting with our customers. And from the organization level, Fiona, we started engaging with families. So we started having a lot of online health programs. We started talking to the women, children, and the spouses of our employee to say we will figure it out together. We had a lot of employee engagement program. Now what has happened, though we are talking so much about attrition, the family is so connected to the organization, they tell the employee, you're not going to leave this organization. They stood by us. And in fact, our productivity has increased. We are much more profitable, though we have attrition, across the globe. It's not that we did not have attrition. The engagement levels have actually increased because there's a sense of belongingness. So when senior people say it is, they say, I have failed in these areas. Now it now becomes the accountability of people to say, okay, let us see how we can support you. I feel I can belong the way I am. I don't have to, show one part of my side which probably my organization will accept. I am the way I am. but I know the accountability and how much I'm going to influence the organization. Just because I'm going to be myself, it does not mean I will be rude with others, because I know the other person is vulnerable. I think leaders play a very important role here.
I love that example of kind of actually getting the whole family kind of
Yeah, we did.
connected. You know, it's not just the employee feeling a sense of belonging. Actually, their kind of entire family feels a sense of belonging to the organization. And I think the role modeling the example you gave of the role modeling of the kind of the CEO as well. I think it's just so important. That we have senior leaders role modeling the sorts of leadership that we're looking for. And it is such a shift. I sort of look back at when I started my career, and to think of describing a CEO with words like empathy or vulnerability is just, it just would never have happened. And so, it has been a really long, a really sort of relatively quick shift, I think. And we're seeing more and more, you're talking about attrition, and we do see more and more, the next generation of workers, that's just a non-negotiable for them when they're looking for an employer. Marienela, over to you. I mean, you manage a large team of customer care professionals. How do you create a safe space for your team to bring their authentic selves to work?
Yeah, it starts by leading by example, right? Showing up as my authentic self, being 100% vulnerable, right? My team is very clear of where I'm strong. I sort of with sort of open arms will say, like, here's been my path, right here. From the time that I'm interviewing somebody, I start to have the conversation about, like, this isn't a place and this isn't a culture. And my organization isn't a place or a culture where, the bus gets run over anybody for any reason. It's just not the culture that I'm building and harnessing, right? And so, it starts from that point. In my interview process, I like to meet with just about every person, not from like a hierarchy thing, but more from I want them to feel comfortable and understand the organization that they're walking into. And again, show like it's, we're looking for folks who are going to come in here and be able to, and be able to show them that they're welcomed regardless of who they are. And that they're going to be able to, bring that value in, right? And your full 360 self is what brings true value. I do build one-on-one relationships. I'm a firm believer that your one-on-one with your team is that, right? It's your one-on-one. It's your time to really get to know each other. The work stuff you can handle in other meetings, right? You use that one-on-one time to get to know your team members, to share about yourself, right? To make them feel comfortable, to understand the things they need to be comfortable. And then, I try to, in team meetings and in other, cross-functional settings, foster some of that too, right? There's yes, we've all got to be productive, and we've got to spend, 45 of the 60 minutes maybe on our business topics, but there's always room and time to kind of pull people in and connect people where I know they may have some things in common that would draw them together. So it's just about, empathy, being a role model, and really also trying to bring people together, so that people have kind of their tribe too within the tribe, right? And everyone feels welcome and comfortable. The other thing is, I'm a participant in our DEIB org. And so I try to make sure that I'm constantly disseminating information into the organization about what we're doing, things going on in our area in Boston, and even some of our folks that are in other areas, things happening that they can feel welcome to participate into. So there's a number of ways, but my number one thing is relationship building and empathy as my go-to for making sure that my team really knows that they're safe being themselves. And that they're welcomed and they're part of the team.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I love what you're saying, that, it's right from, you start demonstrating it right from the kind of recruitment process, because every single key moment in the employee life cycle is one of the ways you can demonstrate, or, for some companies fail to demonstrate which I guess goes back to what you were saying before, Sujatha, about the needing to sort of walk the talk as well, because you can have all the policies and processes in the world, but we know it's how individuals actually experience those policies and procedures that kind of shapes the true culture of an organization. We've talked a bit about the pandemic already, but I mean, it has been such a pivotal moment for kind of workplace culture and inclusion and belonging. But I think we are at a bit of a crossroads now in terms of what can we hold on to in terms of the benefits of what we've experienced. And there's so much discussion and so many different articles out there at the moment. Some organizations are just reverting back to the way things were before, and some it's sort of like a whole new world. And so we've sort of, as we've said, during the pandemic, with most of us working from home, albeit not all workplaces are in that position, but we, a lot of us got a much greater insight into the personal lives of our colleagues. We saw pets, we saw kids, we saw partners, in a way that you would never have experienced before. Do you think, this is kind of that? This is it now, that for many people, whether they wanted to or not, their home self and their work self are permanently merged? Or do you think some people will just sort of go back to sort of shutting the door, I suppose, when they leave the house? Sujatha, maybe going to you first.
So Fiona, we are yet exploring, and that's an honest answer, because at least in India, and because we believe we belong to the banking sector, we have to be at the ground. So when my collections people, my frontline people are at the field, we as leaders, we did not want to operate from home. So we started making safe environment at office, and the leaders started coming to work. So we are still figuring out, but we are comfortable with the hybrid working model. We also started sensitizing our employees initially, Fiona, saying that when we are at the meetings, we are intruding into the personal spaces of our family. So it is okay if your child is walking and sitting beside you when you're in a meeting. The child eventually got bored listening to the same things again and again. The child stopped coming into the room completely, and that's a fact. And we also said, women are now at a lot of stress because they have to manage family and they have to be at work. The working hours actually extended. We said, we allocated few hours and said, this is the employee's time, okay, so that you are not going to disturb the employee. Secondly, we found a lot of men folk getting into cooking. The YouTube was completely utilized, leveraged, and they showed it to all their team members. See, this is what I've cooked for my family. Which, of course, it's difficult here for men entering into the kitchen and working, but they were very comfortable. The women employees ensured that the children are engaged with the grandparents with playing online games. So that was during the pandemic era. Now coming back, now we are post COVID, because women are not still comfortable sending their kids to creche. In our organization, we started nanny reimbursement. So what we do is, we give the women employee who has a baby from 6 months to 6 years, there's a reimbursement. We say that you can employ a nanny at home. And let's say if the women employee who has a baby has to travel and she wants to travel with her baby, we say we reimburse you, your nanny, and the baby. Talent management today has a very different lens, Fiona. Initially, we were saying, mobility is no more constraint, especially for women. You can work from whichever geography you want to work, but you may have to travel if required. Look at the way the lens has completely changed. So I think it has offered a lot of opportunities. Yes, there were a lot of human loss, there was a lot of emotional grief, but it gave you a very different dimension for all of us to work. And then health and wellness became very, very important. We have an app where we give a lot of points. We give free membership to the gym. We give you personalized coaches. We have dietitians and nutritionists who are ready to help you free of cost. In fact, in our health insurance, we reward points if people are healthy. So it is always a lead. We now first talk about health. We now talk about how are you, how is your family, and then we come to work. The minute I ask Fiona, Fiona, how are you? How are your kids doing? Automatically she feels very belonged. Here is an organization, instead of asking what is your target, where are you on your initiatives, I'm asking you as an individual, you as a family. I think this vulnerability gave us a lot of strength, and it is we can talk about fear to our employees without being feeling judged. I think it brought us together.
Yeah, I just can't imagine how we ever would have reached the point without this kind of massive disruption of getting that kind of really deep personal insight into people's lives. Marienela, maybe if you could just, on that same question, what's been the situation in the US in terms of, work self and home self?
Yeah, exactly the same. It has completely shifted, right? Again, like I talked earlier, we were on Zoom. We got to know everything about each other. We were particularly involved in the government's lending program for small businesses, and so we were working 70, 80 hours a week together. There were no filters, right? And we all know each other's kids and families, and that was sort of the general feel here. If the first early, I remember early March, it was all about the panic. And again, as a leadership team, making sure, ourselves, our customers, counterparts, other folks in the industry, just making sure people were okay. It went into that immediate, like, let's just make sure people are okay. And then it went to, okay, so this is lasting and we've got to figure out how it works and our employees feel secure. And again, it's like, I speak not just for myself, but, peers and friends and colleagues, that it really is, it feels like such a family, no matter where you are. You've got an extended family now. And to your point, our conversations never, ever start with, all right, so let's hit the agenda. It's always a good 5-10 minutes of, how are you? How are the kids? Are you guys doing cheer this year? Or whatever it may be, right? It's definitely a lot more personal. I know a ton about, just my team alone. When I think about my team, I sort of know where they all are. We just had folks down in Florida go through a huge, hurricane season. And so knowing where everybody's located, knowing that their families are, in the way of the storm, and being able to provide that support. It's not something that we would have all known the details of prior to. And, I think, just like everybody else, we're sort of, the U.S. is still transitioning to sort of that new really, I think what'll end up being a hybrid world, right? Where folks are in the office for a certain percent of time, but maybe not fully. But we're still figuring that all out.
Yeah, and I sort of stood up a new team during the pandemic, which we're geographically dispersed, so we're never going to have seen each other anyway. But being all at home through that period, it was such a fast track way of getting sort of team bonding. Almost every meeting at the moment starts with, what has your puppy destroyed today, which is, not necessarily the way I want to be starting my meetings, but everyone has a real sense of what's happening in each other's lives.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm really keen to get both of your feedback on, and Marienela, maybe starting with you this time. So what would you say to leaders who may be skeptical about the idea of bringing your whole self to work? I know that there still are some naysayers out there, and people who say things like, we're here to work, we're not here to, tell our life stories or gossip. What would you say to those sort of people that are still a bit sort of stuck in the past?
Yeah. I've fortunately, unfortunately, I'm not sure, but I've had the conversation a couple of times over the last few years, right? And to me, it's about, the first thing I always lead with is, do you realize how much time we spend with each other, right? Because in reality, even outside of the pandemic, we do spend a great majority of our time with our peers, right? And so not truly knowing someone as a leader, how do you find ways to motivate that person? How do you know what they're looking to do with their career? How do you help them grow? How do you connect them with opportunities, right? How do you get them to connect with their work and their responsibilities if you don't actually truly know the authentic person? And the other thing is a little bit of, it takes a little bit of coaching, right, around why this is okay and why it's okay for themselves to be their authentic selves and why that's important too. But I typically do lead with, so let's talk about your team, and let's talk about what motivates your team and how you connect your team, how you're making decisions around resourcing and who works better with you and what customers and matches. And it takes some conversation and some coaching, but you eventually get folks to the place where they're like, okay, yeah, I see this, right? If I don't know what makes this, if I don't know this person, I don't know what makes them tick. I don't know what makes them work. And so that's usually my talk track. And with some, more experienced leaders, it's sometimes easier. When you have a green team, a new team, a younger team, you're coaching through a lot of that, right? But overall, I think you end up, most of the time in a place where folks get it. I don't think anybody's fully resistant to it. I think it's different. I
mean, and everyone has their own boundaries, don't they? It's not that you have to share everything. Like, you can still be a relatively private person, but yes, share enough of yourself to make that connection.
Exactly.
But yeah, I really love that angle of, if you don't know them, how do you know what makes them tick? How do you know what motivates them?
Yeah.
Sujatha, what do you have anything you'd like to add to that question about, the naysayers that might be out there?
Yeah, I think Marienela said most of the things, but two things. I think it's very important for us to have emotional awareness. So do we provide opportunities for leaders to understand themselves? So coaching is definitely very important. The emotional awareness, to understand your limitations and how do you accept your team. That is very, very important, I think. So, and how are you going to handle conflict situations? How are you going to have candid conversations? I think most of us are very good at academics, most of us are very intellectual, we are very, very logical, but when it comes to these finer things of having candid conversation, we are not sure about how are we going to have that conversation. So emotional awareness will always say that yes, I am going to speak the truth and state the facts, but the way I'm going to say is only going to encourage the other person, because you can't pull down your team by saying I'm going to say the truth. No, you know the truth, you have the facts, but the way you're going to position is what is all emotional awareness is all about. And do you provide that to your leaders and employees is a question that the organization need to ask.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think another thing that some people get confused with is it doesn't mean you have to be best friends with people. It's not about necessarily liking or becoming really good friends with people. And so I know sometimes people are concerned, if I become really good friends with them, it's very hard to then discipline or performance manage, for example.
Yeah.
When we're talking about kind of sharing to build connections and authenticity, it's not about becoming best friends and crossing boundaries or changing, the kind of, I suppose, the hierarchy of some of the relationships, but it's just about having that deeper understanding so that if you do need to have a difficult conversation, such as a performance management conversation, you probably would be in much better position to know how the person might respond or how to do it in a way that would kind of give them feedback in a way that would be actually constructive for them, that they could take on board. So I think that's something that I find people think it means kind of sharing everything, which it's certainly not sharing everything. It still needs to be appropriate for a workplace context as well. One thing I'm just curious for both of your thoughts. One of the things that I think is a really reasonable criticism that I've heard a bit is that from different groups who would have loved to have more of this ability to share themselves previously, there are a lot of people that are frustrated that it caused a pandemic to be able to get to this point. And I know particularly, and I think that's particularly the case for people from certain underrepresented groups as well, that kind of didn't feel that they could so easily share. Has that been your experience about, people just frustrated that either the tools weren't available to them or the culture might not have been available to them previously?
Would you like to go about Marienela?
Sure. I mean, I think I've heard a bit of that. Being a woman and a woman of color in leadership, it certainly has come up in a number of forums that I'm a part of. Right. It's taken a long time for us to just show up. And I had one woman who's the CEO of a woman-led bank here in the States, who said to me, it's about time that we were able to show up as ourselves and not sit at the boys' table, right? But have our own table, or be ourselves at the table the way that we want to be and have it be okay. And nothing to do with sort of the personal stuff that comes with that, but everything to do with the emotional intelligence that as women, our authentic women, we bring to the table. And that stayed with me for the past like 12 months in everything that I do. But yes, I've heard it. Particularly, again, in a lot of those forums, but sort of that frustration that it's taken all of this to feel like for the culture to get there.
Yeah. And I should mention we do have the chat open as well. I don't know if we've got any questions coming in at this point, but we do have the chat open. So please, if you have any questions for our speakers, please just pop them in the chat and we will get to them. Sujatha, is there anything else you would like to add in terms of, any other examples that you've got about, creating a culture of belonging that can support people?
Yeah. Before we come to that, I was just, listening to Marienela and saying that about women. I think financial services, we have a lot of women. And in fact, the chief executive of our organization is a woman. She just joined us recently. What I realize is two things. One is the woman herself has to be comfortable and confident. It's all about meritocracy. I don't think it's about quota. It's not about men versus women. I don't think that is the issue here. It is about giving equitable opportunities. So, and we have enough research and studies that say that any organization which has a diversified team is much more productive, is much more profitable. In fact, a recent study of 2021 suggested that any organization which believes in inclusion and diversity increases their revenue by 19% because of innovation. This innovation of new product leads to about, the innovation factor here is about 22%. 19% revenue, 22% in innovation. I think that is the strength of having a diversified team. And organizations which are progressive, which want to be sustainable, have to have diversity as their agenda. You are keeping at the center meritocracy, transparency, and equitable opportunities. I think the youngsters also want to join those organizations. They feel they belong, which has representation of multi-generational employees. Your customers today want a representation of themselves in the employees. I think the entire proposition, Fiona, has changed in the last couple of years. They're more bothered about environment. They're very social conscious. They need representation of talent. It is nothing against gender. It's not against any sex preference. People are saying, can we have equitable opportunities? And organizations are recognizing. So the first thing for for belongingness, I think the senior management have to take a stand. What are we standing for? What is the culture that we want to create? Once the senior management stands for, it's important to have systems, policies, and processes which is going to support. Just your standing for without your governance is not going to help. And how do you communicate to your employees? How do you communicate to your customers, your future customers? I think that is going to differentiate your organization, where you say, yes, the belongingness lies here.
Yeah.
Marienela, over to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, you bring up such a great point on how, you've taken a stance, you've started to build a governance around this, right? How do you communicate that out? I think that's such a big, I feel like that's still a little bit of a challenge, right? Like you're starting to see more prominence in recruiting, a company's recruiting website and in the way that they talk and how they represent themselves. But I think folks are still kind of working through that. How do you communicate that? How do you portray that? How do you show the makeup and the commitment within your organization to, whether it's your customer base, right, who's looking for that reflection in your institution, or it's a recruit, right, that you're trying to hire, that you want to see that same sort of that representation in some way. And so, interested in your thoughts, and I know we are getting close on time, but interested on your thoughts, both of your thoughts, Fiona, you too, sort of like where you both think we are in terms of getting that communicated. I think we've gotten past the, like, you've got to take a stance, you've got to have a position on it, you've got to build governance, but now it's like, how do you disperse that information, whether internally or externally?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a great point, because there's a tipping point at which, so first of all, you need to do the hard work to get your house in order before you could remotely sort of be going out and representing that. And I think we have seen organizations that go out before they've actually kind of done the hard work internally, whether, I guess for a range of diversity and inclusion areas where, and it goes back to the very beginning, Sujatha, when you were talking about needing to walk the talk, that, you can't, you just need to make sure that you're going to follow through on your promises. But I think it's everything from, your EVP, your kind of employment brand proposition as well, and the actions that you take. So I work at ANZ, which is one of the main banks in Australia. And so for us, it's, how do we advertise ourselves to our prospective employees? How do we advertise ourselves to our customers? And making sure that you're reflective, and also what partnerships do you have, whether it's sponsorship, whether it's community partnerships as well, because I think everything that you do, is so much more visible than it's ever been. Sujatha, maybe if you'd like to add something.
Yeah. See, when you said walk the talk, yes, it is definitely walk the talk. But I would, what our organization did, Fiona? We said, how was this engagement during the pandemic, and now that we are done with the pandemic, how is it impacting the organization? Our customer base has increased. Your new customers, that is the youngsters, you have to make your organization the most respected organization. See, any organization can be profitable. I don't think we are talking about profitability anymore. We are taking how do you ensure that any youngster studying in school or college would say, my aspiration is to join Aditya Birla Group. How do you create that? So we started just not working for our customers. We just not started working for our employees. We started working for the society. We started working for the environment. So because we are in the lending business, we ensure that when we are lending, the lendee is actually adhering to the social norms which the organization has incorporated, ensuring there's no child labor, ensuring the lendee has enough representation of women. We also look for people with different abilities. We are saying we will give you, the interest rates will be reduced to the lendee who has these representation, because any change has to happen at the societal level now. It is just not about your bonus, it's just not about your money. It is about how do you create the social consciousness. So how do you ensure that kids are receiving the right education? So the employee's perspective has changed, the youngster's perspective has changed, because of which the organization has changed. It's going to take, Fiona, it's not as simple as I'm saying, because you're trying to change the entire ship. It'll take time. But have we started talking about it? Have we started acknowledging that we haven't done and it's time for us to do? I think that's the first step we all can take.
Well, on that note, I think that's been a perfect place to end. It's been such a wonderful discussion, and thank you both so much for your time. I think anyone would be lucky to be belonging to one of your teams and the great culture that you're creating there. So thank you so much for joining us. And it's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Fiona. It was great insights. And Sujatha, I absolutely enjoyed this. Let's keep in touch.
Same thing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.